Heckler. I was in the 388th Bomb Group. I was a mechanic on the airplanes. We were in Nettishell, England for 27 months. I was assistant crew chief on our crew. We started with a crew of 6 when we left the States, but over there they cut it down later to 4 men on a crew. We had our ups and downs. Sometimes it was rough trying to keep them together and so forth. 13 days from the time I got my notice I was drafted. I was in the service, and I reported to Fort Meade, Maryland, with a passenger train from Collegeville, where I lived, and that went into Fort Meade, and there they asked us a question: if you have business or anything to take care of for 2 weeks, you could go home. But if you didn't, why, I mean, we were shipped right away back down to Biloxi, Mississippi, which they call a mud hole down there. And the rest of the ones that took the time, I think most of them got in the infantry after they come back. Went to Keesler Field, Mississippi, which is an aircraft engine training base. We were there for about 9 months. We left there, and most of us were from the East Coast, and we said, "Oh, we're going to Baltimore, Maryland." We knew we were going to an aircraft factory somewhere, and at Atlanta we started heading west out to Seattle, Washington. I spent a month in Boeing plant out in Seattle, learning more about the 17s and so forth, what we're doing. After I left there, I went into Salt Lake City, and I was there for a couple of hours, and then they sent me to Wendover, and that's where I got into the original squadron, 560th and the 388th Bomb Group, and I was in there all the time. After I left Seattle, we went into Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or Sioux City, I meant to say, and before we went overseas. And from there, well, the planes left from there for England, and we took the Queen Elizabeth over. We were by ourselves most of the time. We had 2 B-25s as escorts for 2 days out of the States, and we went into Edinburgh, Scotland, and there we had a couple English planes met up with us there to bring us in. From there, we took a troop train down to, I guess it was either Bury St. Edmunds, is where we landed with a troop train. Stop for a minute. When we were on the Queen Elizabeth, it was 22 or 24,000 troops on the ship, and they had 8 bunks in a room. It was a stateroom for 1 person, and actually 24 people were in there. 16 hours you were up on the deck, and you had the bunks for 6 hours. 5 porpoises were swimming right aside of us on the way over, which was a lot of fun watching them. We changed course every 7 minutes. Actually, they weren't afraid of a submarine. They said they could outrun a sub. And we landed at Edinburgh, Scotland, and then troop train down. When we got to the field was lit. The Germans lit the field up with hanging yellow flares. I mean, it scared all of us, but I mean, nothing happened. They didn't bomb it, but the Germans knew we were coming. And well, they wanted to stay in the barracks first. I mean, which was a mile and a half from our planes, they said, oh, we'll give you transportation, but that didn't work out. So we got skids from the hangar or something, and then we pitched tents over them. We had tapped electric line 220 for electric power. We had a potbelly stove in there. We had burned high octane gasoline and water remixed for our heat, and we had to carry water. But I mean, outside that, that's the way we lived for 3 years. Each squadron had 16 planes. Roughly, when we lived out there, we were most maybe 400 feet away from the plane that we were working on. All right. I was general mechanic on the planes. I mean, we did what we could. I mean, the larger jobs went into higher echelon, what they call it, where the hangar was, like changing wings or something like that. They would do that in the hangar. When we changed the engines, 3 hours had to be slow time to make sure it was running right. The 4th hour, you really put it to it. And actually, I got a ride one time with one of those. We were chasing horses and cows around the field with a 4-engine airplane, looking up to people in the trestle and the train up on the trestle. But crazy Yanks, you know. A fellow said he could fly it through the hangar. The wing spread of the fort was 109 feet. Anyway, they wouldn't let him fly through the hangar, but I mean, it was pretty close. But another time I was up for a ride, and actually I was crewing a training plane, and my time, they only had it a month, and my time was just about up, and the pilot came out and I said, how about a ride? And he says, yeah, grab a parachute. I didn't know where we were going, and we went up to northern England. What happened? I mean, the pilot had ditched in the channel and was rescued by the RAF field up there. So he wanted to see his buddy up there. So the navigator said over the intercom, he says, where's the runways? Pilot says, they're down there. Don't you see them? He brings it in on grass runway. They never had a fort in on this fighter field. And the pilot said, will you stay with the plane? I said, yeah, I think the whole RAF Air Force was coming out to ask questions. I better get home. Their officer was along with me too, with a ride, same as I was. And he says, I wonder if they're going to buzz the field. They buzzed it 3 times. English brought the crash trucks out and the fire trucks and everything else out for us. And I guess the weather officer, he was starting, or from the tower, I guess he was getting a little sick too, and then he thought it was too much. Actually, my size, I was pretty short and small, and they used me for inboard superchargers. You had to crawl in through a small triangle in the wing to get to the inboard engines, and you had to loosen 4 bolts in there, and when they put a new one up, I mean, you had to put 4 more, put them back. Other crew chiefs would come in the squadron. I knew what they were coming for. As soon as I saw them, you know, Walt, we need you for, take a supercharger out. And actually, I did for quite a few of them for the squadron. I mean, rather than just the one plane I was working on. And we had our ups and downs. Sometimes it was pretty rough, but sometimes it not too bad. One time, Seagull hit right in the oil cooler on the plane and tore things up. The plane was out of commission for 3 days just from a bird going in there. Sheet metal worked, and we had to change the oil cooler and so forth. Okay. Later, they brought a B-29 in our field just to show us. We were supposed to get B-29s after the war was over in Europe, and head for Okinawa. And they brought one in just to show us, and they made us lower these tents that we were living in. We thought they wouldn't have enough room with the wings going over them, but it was clear. I mean, we wouldn't have to lower them, but I mean, they insisted we did, and it was quite something to see, that plane. But we never did get on that. I mean, the day I got home, for 30 days, I mean, and the Japs surrendered the day I was come home. And then I went back to Indian Hand Gap and had 5 days or something. Then I got out service.
Could a B-17 sustain much battle damage?
Oh yeah, they could. Anywhere from, well, some of them come back with half of the tail off and so forth, and some holes you could crawl into them. Some little holes, maybe your size of your little finger or something like that. All kinds of holes and stuff like that.
Can you describe the preparation for a mission, what you would do?
Well, we pre-flight it, made sure, I mean, each mission had a certain amount of gas that they went. I mean, not always we fill the tanks. I mean, if it was a short run, I mean, we only fill them part way. And that was kind of keep weight down. So then we had to pre-fly them, check the engines, made it at they run and so forth. And, you have to pull the props through before you can start them. Get the oil out of the bottom cylinders. It's generally take 2 men to pull them through half decent. It's a little tricky sometimes. And we had a starter, a little small generator that was used to help start the engine. A few days after we were there, I mean, it was a small church on the perimeter. The base was around like a triangle, and I went to this church one Sunday, and I met a family there, and they actually took me in like their own. Matter of fact, they still correspond with me. I mean, the children do. The parents have passed away, and I mean, we did a lot for them. I mean, they hardly had anything to eat or anything else, and a little bit of margarine or a little bit of butter for a whole month. I mean, in a family of 6, I mean, I don't know how they did it, but some food was pretty rough. They lived in half a twin house, and the next door neighbor was a policeman, and he said to me, he said, "Do you like pheasant?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going to get one 9 o'clock." He said, "The policeman listens to the news every night at 9 o'clock." So he came back with a pheasant. I didn't have much of it, to tell you the truth, but the food was real scarce over there. And he had some parts, and he said if I'd buy some bicycle parts that I needed, and he would fix me up a bicycle, and when I left, these boys would get it. They were pretty small. So that's what I did. I had a bicycle as a rider. Of course, pretty much everybody had a bicycle in England.
About your nighttime.
What?
You're
right. One night I had a 12-hour pass, and I went into Bury St. Edmunds, which was roughly, I would say, about 12 miles away. And here it got dark, and I got lost coming home. And they have no road signs. They took them all down. So, and I saw, I think he was a grocer or something going home, and we weren't supposed to tell where we were. He says, "I think I know where you are," and he gave me directions, but I was still lost. And one time the road made a sharp bend, and I was ended up in a cornfield. But as soon as the sun come up, I knew where I was, and I got back all right. And one time I was working in the wing on superchargers, like I was telling you before, and two mosquitoes come buzzing in the plane. They were just right above us. It scared the daylights out of us. I mean, but they didn't do anything. They would just scare us as all. Another time we had a plane come in. The hydraulic system was damaged on the plane. It landed on a cross runway, and he had no control of brakes or anything. His wingtip caught another wingtip of a plane sitting on the ground. He went, that wasn't too bad. And then he went maybe 400 feet, crashed into a loaded gasoline truck with 4,000 gallons of fuel and another airplane. And we had a nice little fire there. But the flight crew got out of that, but one mechanic was killed. But I mean, that was quite an experience. Hold on a minute. We all lived in the tents, as it was easier for the mechanics to be close to the planes because you never know when you were needed. Like I said, we had electric, and living conditions were kind of rough, but I mean, we made out all right. We had to carry water, but we did have heat and electric.
The heat was...
The latrine was out in the back of the tents, which we had to use, but
What kind of beds did you have?
they were bunk beds. I mean, single bunk beds, but you could pile the covers on, and it seemed like you'd never get warm. I mean, English weather, I mean, was cold, like seemed like it always went through you. Regardless of how many covers you put on, it seemed like you had a hard time getting warm.
What fuel did you use to heat the tent?
100 octane gasoline and oil. We mix it up.
Tell me about the big engines that were on a B-17. How sturdy were they? How much maintenance did they take?
Oh, well, we had to check the propellers out good. If we had a nick in the propeller or something, I mean, that had to be, sometimes you had to take them off and put another one on. I mean, they wouldn't take too much, I mean, that way. Spark plugs and stuff, sometimes you had to change those. I mean, they were radio engines. I think there were 13 cylinders in the radio. Some were Pratt Whitney, some were can't think of the name of the others off me, but sometimes we had, well, every so many miles, so many hours. I mean, they had to do work on them, what they call overhaul. I can't tell you offhand how often they were, but I mean, that was all paperwork. Anything real big all went into what they call the higher echelon hangar. Sometimes you have a lot of trouble with them, and sometimes you didn't.